This is Science 2034. 20 years ago, the Science Coalition was formed to strengthen federal support for basic scientific and engineering research. We tell the stories of what federally funded research has made possible and what will be reality 20 years from now. Our guest today, Ronald J. Daniels, president of Johns Hopkins University and a professor in the Department of Political Science.
I'm very concerned about whether the promise that can be realized in biomedical research today will in fact be achieved by virtue of our failure to think as imaginatively and as creatively about the investments we need to make. So at one level, the explanation for why it's so hard to support young scientists today, and again, to support young scientists in the face of very significant promise of their research, is just simply because we as a country, as a society, have failed to keep pace in terms of the investment necessary in science. And so if you look at over the last decade, the trend of NIH funding, and you can see very simply that the funding envelope has contracted by 20%. And the contraction of that funding in real terms means that everything is much more competitive, that the pay lines have decreased, that the scope for funding has been reduced correspondingly, and that's a bad thing across the entire scientific workforce. But where it hits particularly hard is on those young men and women who are starting off their career in science. And here what's really striking is that if you look at about 10, 15 years ago, the age at which a graduate with an MD was receiving his or her first R01 was about 38. We're now at a stage where it's in excess of 45 years. So what this means is, because there's contracted funding, it's become that much more difficult for all scientists to get funding, but particularly hard for the young scientists. What is the consequence of people, young men and women who are committed to science, excited by science, who have trained for science, but then ultimately not finding a role in our biomedical research workforce? What does that portend for the country? And it's here that this has just simply catastrophic consequences for our country and for, indeed, the globe. When you look at where the great revolutions have been made, where paradigms have been shifted, where science has had its most discernible effect, research has had its most discernible effect on scientific paradigms, it is typically related to the work of brave young men and women who enter the field. At one level, the advice I have for young people is stay the course. Stay the course. You came to this field because you were passionate. You felt that your life would find meaning and you'd have impact if you committed yourself to scientific inquiry. And you got to be true to yourself, so that you've got to stay the course. You know, it's just so important that we don't lose these scholars of promise from our field. And I say that because I'm very confident that we as a society are going to be able to provide responses to the challenges that we're seeing now in funding for our biomedical workforce. I think it's really important that we think about the biomedical workforce and in a way that encourages lots of experimentation and innovation in the way in which we fulfill the promise of this system. So, for instance, it would be, of course, I think, useful to develop other ways, in addition to the many ways in which the NIH currently has set-asides or earmarks for young scientists for various types of grants, to think about what other ways we could do that. So I think that's one area which is helpful. But I think it's also useful to think about whether we can compress the time that students spend in scientific training. It is a very long process. One thinks about an undergraduate degree, then a graduate degree, then postdoctoral activity, and then additional fellowships following that. This can be a very long period, a very long gestation period before someone is ready to apply for grants. And here, I think particularly at universities, are finding ways in which we can compress the period of PhD training and perhaps even thinking about combined doctoral and postdoctoral programs that really collapse that training period and get scientists into the labs earlier where they achieve independence is an important priority. And I think there's a lot of scope for change in that domain. One of the things that has been so remarkable about this country, the genius of this country, has been its willingness to invest where other countries have not in basic R&D, and recognizing that that investment will have a whole host of consequences that will improve the economic, the social life of this country, and indeed around the world in ways that we can't possibly imagine. And that's why we've got to be true to that history, and we've got to go back to protecting this investment that is so critically important to the character of this country's success. The area that I'm probably most excited about right now and have had a lot of exposure to is in relation to cancer immunotherapy. And here, for those of us who have seen family members suffer through cancer, through the treatment protocols, which, as we know, are often worse than the disease themselves, and to see how at times crude and rudimentary chemotherapy, surgery, radiotherapy is, to all of a sudden see over the last several years the fruits of these new approaches to cancer treatment that focus on trying to understand the immunology of cancer and to understand why the body's natural immunological system is not identifying cancer and being able to treat it quite naturally without the kind of catastrophic side effects that you see with all these other traditional therapies. Seeing the promise of that has left me simply breathless. And here at Hopkins, led by several colleagues, I'm thinking of Drew Pardal and Suzanne Topolin, among others, the work that they have been doing with PD-1 inhibitors in the context of melanoma, lung cancer, other forms of malignancy, and seeing that on the administration of these drugs without serious side effects, that people who had failed every conventional therapy are all of a sudden seeing their disease simply evaporate. Seeing these moments when you look at CAT scans where you have individual patients who have metastatic disease, and then seeing after the administration of these agents that the body quite naturally is able to identify and destroy the disease, and seeing it just disappear from the CAT scans. It takes your breath away. I'm really hoping that the next 20 years that we see this revolution in cancer and the long war, the long battle that we've been waging in cancer, I think finally will bear fruit. And my hope is that these therapies, which we now see in a number of different forms of cancer, will ultimately be the dominant form of therapy, and a form of therapy that will again create significant increases in quality of life, in life expectancy, but also importantly will create new firms, new industries that will bring great benefits to the country. That's what I'm really excited about.